twists.
Silence, all stand. Please be seated. Your Honour. Your Honour, our first witness this morning is Miss Karen Hodkinson. I call Miss Hodkinson.
Now, Ms Hodkinson, do you wish to take the oath or the affirmation?
I'll swear on the Bible, Your Honour.
All right, so I'll just have the Bible handed to you now. Could you repeat after me, please? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God
That the evidence I shall give.
that the evidence I shall give
In this Royal Commission.
in this Royal Commission
Shall be the truth.
shall be the truth,
The whole truth.
the whole truth,
And nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. If you just hand the Bible back, please, and I'll pass you back now to Ms Dwyer.
Thank you.
Miss Hodkinson, could you tell the Royal Commission your full name?
Karen Leah Hodkinson.
You've prepared a statement for the Royal Commission which is dated the 28th of July 2015. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is the information that you've written in that statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
It is.
Your Honour, I tender that statement and its annexures.
30.16.
Ms Hodkinson, if you're happy to read that statement, could I ask you to start at paragraph 5?
My full name is Karen Leah Hodkinson. I am 55 years old. I was born in Hillsville in 1960. I am the second eldest of 4 children born to my mother and my father. My mother and father separated in 1969 when I was about 9 years old. In January of 1970, my mother took me and my 3 brothers to Perth with her. In late March or early April of 1970, we were involved in a serious car accident while over there, and my mother's new de facto partner was killed. I received massive injuries to the right-hand side of my body, and my mother also received serious injuries which left her requiring long-term medical care. In November of 1971, after the accident, my mother sent me and my siblings back to Victoria to live with my father because she was having trouble looking after us. My father then gained custody of all children. Just with that one, Your Honour, I want to make it clear that myself and my oldest brother were sent over first, and then 6 months later, the 2 younger brothers were also sent back. So there was a separation in there. My father was a sawmiller and running his own sawmill business at the time. On 19th of April 1973, when I was 13 years old, I appeared at the Alexandra Children's Court in Victoria after being charged by police with larceny after I stole $14 from a pantry at the Marysville Hotel where I was working as a cleaner during the school holidays. I stole the money because my father was struggling financially at the time. I was sentenced to probation for 1 year. In early of 1974, when I was just 14 years old, my father was called to my school to be interviewed by a psychologist at the request of my probation officer, the headmaster because I was stealing pencils and other children's school lunches. After seeing the psychologist, my father returned to the house, packed his personal belongings and took me and my siblings to my auntie's house. My father told my auntie he was going to Perth to find my mother to see if she could help. My father never returned. I think he had a breakdown due to the stress of running his own business and caring for 4 children on his own. A few days after my father left, my mother and her new husband came from Perth to see us. She told us this would be the last time we saw her because she was dying of cancer. My mother returned to Perth and my 2 younger brothers and I continued to live with my auntie. My auntie had 3 children of her own and was living in a small 3-bedroom house in Hillsville at the time. My older brother moved in with my grandmother, who was living just down the road. My auntie was pretty horrid towards me and my brothers. She placed a lot of blame for our parents' separation on us. I became very depressed and was taken to see a local doctor who prescribed me Valium. I've been shown a report from a social worker that describes my behaviour as being, during that time, as being quite uncontrolled. The report states that I was demanding such things as tomato sandwiches at 4 a.m. in the morning and demanding to be bathed at odd hours. On March the 28th, 1974, I tried to kill myself by overdosing on the Valium I was prescribed. The following morning, I was admitted into Hillsville Base Hospital. The next day, my grandmother took me to Melbourne Children's Court on Batman Avenue, and I was made a ward of the state of Victoria. I understand that my aunt felt that she couldn't care for me anymore, and I had no other family members who could look after me. The court order states that I was a child in need of care and protection for being exposed. The court ordered that I be sent to Winlaton. My grandmother drove me from the courthouse to Winlaton because it was on her way back home. I spent the next 6 months at Winlaton. My experiences at Winlaton. I remember when I arrived at Winlaton, I was introduced to Mrs. Baxter, the woman in charge. On arrival, I was given a couple of dresses, a couple of pairs of socks, and a pair of slippers. I was also given a day leave outfit which consisted of a dress, a pair of shoes and a pair of stockings. But this was kept in the storeroom. All the personal items that my grandmother sent with me were put in a suitcase and were also kept in the storeroom. I was first sent to a section called Gunya. I thought Gunya was an assessment area and was where all new girls were sent to be assessed. However, it also housed girls who were dangerous and violent because it was a security section. Within the first or second week at Winlaton, I was taken to the VD clinic in Fitzroy. It was down behind St Vincent's Hospital. I was made to sit in a chair with my legs in stirrup while a staff member examined me internally. I remember screaming through this examination. This was something every girl was subjected to shortly after arriving at Winlaton. Even if you were released and later returned to Winlaton, you had to go through this again. I stayed in Gunya for about a month or so before being transferred to a section called Coringal in April of 1974. There was a Scottish lady with black hair in charge of that section at that time. I think her name might have been Mrs. Jackson or Jamison. In Coringal, the girls slept in small rooms that had only 2 beds and 2 wardrobes in them. Most of the time we shared a room with another girl, but this depended on how many children were in the section at the time. We were locked in our rooms during the night. Each room had a big metal door which had a small window in it that was about 3 inches wide by about 1 foot long. There was also a button installed in the room that you would use to alert staff if you needed to go to the toilet during the night. The bedrooms were on each side of a long hallway. At one end of the hallway was a meals room. On the other end of the hallway was a communal recreational room. Midway down the hallway, on one side was the shower and toilet block. In late June of 1974, I was transferred from Coringal to a section called Leawarra. All the girls had their own individual rooms in Leawarra. It was an open section, which meant that only the front door and the windows were locked. We were not locked in our rooms. I wasn't like other girls in Winlaton. Most of them smoked, and they told me stories of how they broke into cars and houses when they were on the outside. Sexual abuse by Paul Yu. While I was in Coringal, I was assigned a social worker named Paul Yu by the Social Welfare Department. I had a number of other social workers before Yu, but I can't now recall their names. I first met Yu in the head office at Winlaton. In head office was reception area, Mrs. Baxter's office, a room set up for visits by doctors and dentists, and a room used for interviews by either police or social workers. Yu introduced himself as my social worker and told me that it was his job to help me, and that if I had any problems I could talk to him. Yu was of an Asian appearance, and in his early to late 20s. He was about 5 foot 5 or 6 inches tall, slim, clean shaven. He had short black hair. He also wore glasses from time to time. I started seeing Yu about once a week. I always met him in the head office, and we had our discussions in the interview rooms there. In one of our first meetings, Yu brought me a block of chocolate, and soon after that he brought me a pen and paper. I think he did this to break the ice. On a couple of occasions, Yu took me out of Winlaton on day leave. I remember on one occasion he took me on an outing with another female social worker and another girl from Winlaton. On another occasion, he took me and another girl from Winlaton to a church event. At first, I thought he was a really nice, caring person. I've been shown a document called a review report dated 25th of June 1974 that notes that I was in Leawarra at this time, and that Karen is very excited about her weekend leave with Paul Yu. I believe that not long after my weekend leave with Yu, he sexually abused me for the first time. one day you put his hand on my leg and told me that he could make things easier for me if I was nice to him. I remember that this was a couple of days after I'd been placed back in Gunya on punishment because I'd done something wrong. He told me that I didn't have to go back to Gunya and then leant forward and kissed me. He kept kissing me and then put his hand under my dress and touched me on the outside of my underwear. The next thing I remember is walking out of the interview room and seeing Mrs. Baxter at the reception area. She turned around to face us and asked, "How are we today?" You replied, "Fine," and I just stood there. I then recalled you signed out and Mrs. Baxter unlocked the main door and let you out, reporting of the sexual abuse. After you had left, Mrs. Baxter asked me what was wrong. I remember breaking down and telling Baxter that you had touched me. Mrs. Baxter slapped me across the face and said words to the effect of, "How dare you make up such dirty lies about one of my staff members? You're nothing but a dirty, lying little bitch. Girls like you are why we have places like this, because you need to be taught to tell the truth." I kept telling Mrs. Baxter that I wasn't lying. However, she refused to believe me and took me back to Gunya. I was then locked up in Gunya for a couple of days in the section behind the wall made out of glass bricks. This was where the girls were sent if they misbehaved. Gunya was horrible. The cells in lockup didn't even have beds. I was given a blanket and had to sleep on the floor. There was a button on the wall to let staff know if I needed to go to the toilet, and meals were brought to me. When I was back on Leewara, I remember I tried to speak to Mrs. Baxter on another occasion about the incident, but Mrs. Baxter told me that if I continued to lie, she would send me back to Gunya. You continued to visit me about once a week. Continued to touch me, and one day, about 2 weeks after the first incident, he raped me. In total, I can remember 3 occasions that you had sex with me. He told me that other girls did it for him as well. The abuse went on for about 3 months. I never reported the further abuse because I felt that if I did, Mrs. Baxter would punish me and send me back to Gunya. Not long after the last time you had sex with me, all of a sudden he stopped coming and visiting me, and I was allocated a different social worker, a female. I never dealt with another male social worker again after you, and never disclosed the further abuse because I felt I would be punished. Even after leaving Winlaton and being discharged from the care of the department, I still never reported my abuse to authorities. I didn't know who to go to, and I didn't think that anyone would believe me if I did. There are documents in my ward file that note that you was my social worker between June and October of 1974. Released from Winlaton. On the 11th of November 1974, I was released from Winlaton to go to work as a housekeeper for a family in Lilydale. I was given board of $15 per week. I was only 14 years old at the time. After 4 months working as a housekeeper, I was fired and sent back to Winlaton and back to Leawarra. In August of 1975, I got a job at Box Hill and District Hospital and was released from Winlaton and moved into a flat which was located within walking distance of the hospital. Even so, the department officers to report. Occasionally, a staff member from the department would visit me at home. The staff members I dealt with were always female. I was discharged from the care of the department on October the 19th, 1976, when I was 16 years old. As a result of the abuse I suffered as a child, I cannot form loving relationships with men. I can't even stand to be touched by them. I'm very distrustful of men. I have had 8 children and a number of failed marriages. I have suffered from depression most of my life. I've been on medication in the past and should be on medication now, but I don't like how it makes me feel. I've been living on my own for the past 3 years, and I spend most of my time at home. I also have nightmares quite often. The request for my ward files. I requested a copy of my ward file from the Department of Human Services in Victoria in about October of 2014. I received a copy of my ward file within 4 to 5 weeks of making that request. The file I received is in a redacted format. I received about 106 pages of documents and was told that 3 or 4 pages had been removed. I wasn't told why those pages had been removed from my file. After receiving my copy of my ward file, I found out that there should be an institute-specific file in relation to my time at Winlaton. In February of 2015, I requested a copy of my Winlaton file from the department. I only received my Winlaton file last week, about 6 months after requesting it. I had to keep chasing them up. I have not yet reviewed that file in its entirety. I have now, though, Your Honour. Recommendations for change. I don't think any childcare worker should be left alone with any child under any circumstances. I have grandchildren who are currently in the care of DHS. When they come to visit me at my home, a male employee of DHS brings them to my home. It makes me very upset that my grandchildren are transported to and from my home in a car alone with him. I also believe that children should have the opportunity to talk to an adult of their own sex at all times. I believe that children are more willing to disclose abuse to someone of the same sex. I also believe that children from one family should be placed together. They shouldn't be separated because isolation and separation within families. I was separated from my brothers the entire time I was in care, and because of this there's no closeness between us. Today we are total strangers.
Ms Hodkinson, I've just got 2 questions for you. One is about the records. You told the Royal Commission that you've now had the opportunity to go through the files that you received. Did it seem to you that all the files relating to you were there?
No.
What made you think some were missing?
There is a document in there signed by a Jean Dufton, who was the head lady of Leawarra. And it says, Karen is now settling in well here at Leawarra after her lengthy stay on Warina. There's nothing in that files about Warina. There's nothing about Goonya. And I think there's about 2 or 3 pages about Karingal. That file's not complete.
And how does that make you feel?
Angry?
Was it important to you to try and access the files?
Yes, it
related
is.
to your time in care?
Yes, it is.
Important for you to try and put those pieces of the puzzle together?
Yes.
We had a chance to talk outside of the courtroom, and you were explaining to me that you've been here for the last couple of days listening to the stories of other survivors.
Yes.
How did that make you feel?
Pretty distressing at times.
What was it about those stories? We spoke outside. There was something about them that really resonated with you.
Everything everyone seems to be saying is my story over and over again. Yes, the men talked about their time in Turana, changed the name Turana to Winlaton. They talked about being threatened by the person who perpetrated them. We're being locked up in the lock-up section at Turana. I was threatened with Goonya. It was like everybody else telling my story as well.
Thank you very much, Ms Hodkinson.
Thank you.
Does anyone at the bar table have any questions of this witness?
Thank you, Your Honour.
Dr. Marriage.
Ms Hodkinson, my name is Martine Marrick and I'm your legal representative.
Yes.
Just following on from Counsellor Sisting's questions which related to the records. In relation to Warina, it is of significance to you, isn't it? There was an incident relating to your leaving Warina that is still a memory for you?
There's 2 incidents about Warina that I remember quite significantly.
And briefly, in relation to when you left Warina, could you describe for the Commission that incident?
I remember walking past the head lady, I think her name was Mrs. West, and there was a girl that had either been to work that day or had come back to Warina. I remember Mrs. West holding her hand against the girl's throat and holding her up against the glass. I remember her threatening to physically put her fingers inside her vagina to see if she had had sex while she was out.
Thank you. Now, I just wish to ask you a number of questions about your statement. It will only take a couple of minutes. In relation to the hearing at the Melbourne Children's Court in March 1974 when you were made a ward of the state, do you have a memory of that hearing?
I have very vague memories of it.
Do you remember if you had a legal representative at the hearing?
No.
Do you remember if you had a personal representative that could speak on your behalf?
It may have been my grandmother, I'm not sure.
Do you remember if evidence was given to the magistrate at that hearing?
No.
Do you remember if questions were asked?
No.
Perhaps questions weren't asked or just that you don't have a memory of it?
I don't have a memory of it.
Very well. Do you remember the magistrate making the order?
No.
Did the magistrate explain the order to you?
No.
Do you remember how long the order was to last?
No.
Now, the order mentions that you were exposed, and it's in the order of the court, it's just described in that single word. And if we assume that that was exposed to moral danger, was it ever explained to you what moral danger you were actually exposed to?
No.
Now, I'll just take you to when you were taken to the VD clinic at Fitzroy.
Yes.
Now, prior to that procedure, did you have any sexual history?
Prior to that procedure, I was a virgin. I hadn't even had a boyfriend.
Was a health history taken from you in relation to your sexual history before you undertook that procedure?
I believe so, yes.
Would that have been at, or was that at Winlaton, or was that at the clinic?
I believe it was at Winlaton.
Very well. Now, in relation to the procedure, was it explained to you by the staff at Winlaton what was going to take place?
No, the girls did that.
The girls did that.
Yes.
And what did they tell you was going to take place?
They were laughing at me because they knew that I hadn't been with anybody, and they told me that they'd be shoving this thing up inside me.
Did anyone at the VD clinic explain what was going to take place?
No,
Was your permission obtained for the procedure?
no,
Now, you've mentioned that a staff member examined you internally. Do you remember if that staff member was male or female?
I don't remember. There was too many people in that room.
How many people do you remember being in that room?
I remember 4 of them holding me down. I don't remember seeing the other people that did the actual examination because I was screaming that I was a virgin and not to do this to me.
The people that were holding you down, do you remember if they were Winlaton staff or from the clinic?
There was some that were the staff and some that were from the clinic.
Were you the only person from Winlaton, the only ward or trainee from Winlaton having the procedure on that day?
No,
Could you...
there was about 4 other girls there with me.
Just one final topic, and it's a sensitive one, but we've heard evidence from one other witness about sanitary care while the girls had their periods. Did you have your period when you were in Winlaton?
Yes.
What arrangements were made for your sanitary care?
If you got your periods, you had to notify the staff. They gave you the pad. When that pad became dirtied, you had to go and ask for another one. And they gave you a pad and they gave you a brown paper bag. You had to go to the bathroom, you had to change yourself, put the clean pad on, put the dirty one in the brown paper bag. You then had to walk back to the staff member who would then open the bag, look at the pad, throw it in the bin and usually write down on a piece of paper with a tick against your name.
Thank you very much.
Anything arising out of that, Mr. Turana? Ms Hodkinson, thank you for your attendance at the Royal Commission, and you're now excused.
Thank you.
Dean. Your Honour, in relation to the next witness, there is a further non-publication order that I need to put on the record. That witness is BGD. It's a direction not to publish pursuant to section 6D3 of the Royal Commission Act and relates to a number of names that are on a piece of paper that will be provided to parties.
Thank you. That direction's already been made, Ms Dam.
A piece of paper that will be provided to parties.
Thank you. That direction's already been made, I understand. Now, this is BGD.
It is, Your Honour.
Is ready to give evidence.
Yes, Your Honour. Would Your Honour excuse me for one
Yes,
moment?
of course.
Yes, I understand that we can start. I'm unsure if BGD can hear me, but I think she can.
Yes.
BGD's just confirmed that she can hear me, Your Honour.
Yes.
Very well.
BGD, can you also hear me?
Yes, just.
Okay, try and fix that. Is that a little bit better?
That's better.
All right. Now, do you wish to take the oath or the affirmation for the purposes of giving
The oath.
evidence? The oath. And do you have a Bible there with you in the room?
Yes.
Could you raise the Bible, please, and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
the evidence I shall give
in this Royal Commission
in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. So you can replace the Bible, and I'll hand you back to Ms Dwyer. We should explain, Ms Dwyer, just for the purposes of those following the proceedings, that this witness is in a remote location and is giving evidence with the assistance of a staff member of the Royal Commission.
Thank you. BGD, you are known in these proceedings as BGD, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you've provided a statement for the Royal Commission which is dated the 30th of July 2015. That's correct?
That's correct.
The evidence in that statement is true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Your Honour, I tender that statement and its annexures.
30.17.
Could you pick up your... And if you're ready now, if you can, you've got your statement in front of you there.
Yes.
Could you pick up your... And if you're ready now, if you could read that for us from there.
I was born in Victoria in 1964. I am the eldest of 6 children. My 2 younger sisters died when they were babies. One of my younger brothers died when he was almost 6. I remain close to one of my 2 sibling brothers. My parents married in 1964 after my mother fell pregnant with me. For as long as I can remember, my father was violent and unpredictable. He was also an alcoholic. During my childhood, he was admitted as a certified patient at Royal Park Psychiatric Hospital a number of times. Over the years, he had been diagnosed with various disorders, including personality disorder, paranoid schizophrenia, and alcoholism. My mother suffered from depression and voluntarily admitted herself to psychiatric hospitals several times during my childhood. She used to constantly tell me that I was a huge inconvenience in her life. My relationship with my mother has always been complicated. My parents' marriage was volatile. My father was physically abusive to my mother, my siblings and I. He hit and belted my mother when something wasn't right and then punched us too. When my father abused my mother, she in turn was emotionally and verbally abusive to my siblings. I was the target most of the time, becoming a ward of the state. On the 28th of December 71, when I was 7, my mother took me and my 3 young brothers to Russell Street Police Station and voluntarily admitted us to the care of the state of Victoria. On the 31st of December 71, the Melbourne Children's Court made us an order to admit me to the care of the social welfare branch. The order my younger was admitted a couple of months later. My brothers and I were immediately placed at a Lambie Reception Centre in Burwood. On the 23rd of February 1972, my brothers and I were trained at Lambie Reception Centre in Burwood. On the 23rd of February, the place for kids. I stayed at Big Kids for about 4 years. On 18th of February 1973, one of my younger brothers, I stayed at Big Kids for about 4 years. On 18th of February 1973, one of my younger brothers died after drowning at the beach across from Vic Kids. The problems in my family. My aunts blamed my mother for his death for a little while. My grandmother held me responsible. She said to me the words to the effect of, "You should have protected him." For many years, I was terrified of swimming. On the 24th of August 1976, my brothers and I were released from Vic Kids and returned to my mother's care. She had made an application to the department to have us return to her care. We were, however, still wards of the state. Attempted rape by BGF. When my brothers and I returned home to my mother in August 76, she was living with her new boyfriend. While we were in care, my father had been involuntarily detained in psychiatric unit at Mont Park. One afternoon, not long after I returned home, BGF attempted to rape me while my mother was out. I was 12 years old at the time. After the attempted rape, I told my mother and my grandfather about what happened. When I told my mother what happened, she was very upset, confused, and did not believe my story. My grandfather reported to the police, then came to my house and took a police statement from me. On the 6th of October 76, I told a social worker named Jennifer Powell about the attempted rape. The next day I met with another social worker named Carolyn Pearl, who I met while at Vic Kids. On 11th of October 76, BGF was charged with attempted carnal knowledge. He was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 3 months in jail. BGF continued to live with us in the family before he was convicted. I know now that my father sexually abused me when I was a baby and a little girl. He admitted to this to me when I was in my late 20s, and my mother admitted that she had seen him but dismissed it as nothing important. My mother said to the words to the effect, "You are only 2, it doesn't matter." What mother does that? I have never gotten over her response. My father returned to live with my mother, my brothers and myself in August 77 when I was 13. In late 77, my parents separated and my mother and brothers went to live with my grandparents. I remained living with my father. During this period, father bought me gifts and very affectionate. After a while, he began to cuddle, grope and kiss me. I know now that he was grooming me and that this was sexual abuse and not normal father affection. One afternoon in 77, my father called me.
One afternoon in 1977, my father called me into his bedroom after I got home from school. He told me to undress and lie down on the bed next to him. I did as I was told, because I thought I would be in trouble if I didn't. He groped my breasts with his hands, he kissed me inappropriately, and then raped me. After I was raped, my father threatened to kill me if I told anyone about it. Because of this threat, I was too scared to tell anyone. I also didn't tell anyone because I did not think anyone would believe me, especially after the response to the attempted rape by BGF. About a month after this first incident, my father raped me again. After this, my father raped me regularly for over a year.
Yeah. The rape stopped briefly when I moved back in with my mother and my brothers. It started again when my mother, father and brothers and I all moved into a new home together. Over time, the attacks became more frequent. My father raped me almost every day in almost every room flat where we lived. The abuse also became more aggressive. I recall that my father would grab me by the throat and push me against the wall, and if I said no, he said words to the effect, "You'll do as I'll tell you, you'll do what I want." During this, the social worker, Pearl, visited the family home. She tried to help but couldn't. I remember one day when she got upset with me for missing school. I actually enjoyed going to school because it was a distraction from my family. But sometimes I didn't attend because of what was happening at home. Admission to care. In 1979, I should be 14. When I was 14 years old, I'd started running away from home. I started to self-harm. On the 15th of February 1979, I ran away and refused to return home. I was placed in temporary accommodation at the house of the Gentle Bunyip in Clifton Hill. A few days later, on the 19th of February, I ran away from the Gentle Bunyip and returned the next day. During this period, Brian Fitzgerald was my social worker. My general recollection of Fitzgerald is that he seemed to be more concerned with what my mother wanted and what suited her. This is how most of the department staff seemed to me. First disclosures of sexual abuse to the department staff. On the 20th of March 79, I told Fitzgerald and that my father was sexually abusing me. I had been shown a copy of a file note about a meeting between Gerald, Pearl and myself and their proposed follow-up. I don't recall telling Fitzgerald and Pearl at this meeting that my father had raped me and was trying to rape me again. On March the 23rd, 1979, I was transferred from Gentle Bunyip to Kildonnan Teenage Unit at Hawthorn, Winlaton. I remember running away from Kildonnan and visiting my father at a boarding house in North Melbourne. I told the police officers that I kept running away from home because my father was raping me. I remember a police officer telling me that I couldn't make a formal statement unless I was with an adult. I had no support from my mother and didn't have any other supportive adults in my life. On the 31st of March 1979, I was taken to Winlaton. I've been shown a copy of a report signed by Fitzgerald dated the 5th of April 79 that records my transfer from Kildonnan to Winlaton. I was placed in Warrena's section at Winlaton and I can't recall any induction procedures. When I arrived, I shared a room with another girl. There were two other sections, Gunya and Karingal. The girls from all three sections interacted at the school we went to in Winlaton. There was also a remand centre and a hostel. At Winlaton, I felt safe because I was away from my family. It was like a sanctuary. I didn't mind school and liked doing carpentry. Having said that, I didn't think it was fair that I was locked up when I hadn't done anything wrong. I hated being locked in a room the whole time. When I got to Winlaton, everyone, including staff and other girls, seems to know that my father was raping me. Did chores in the kitchen, and I recall the cook saying to the effect, "Oh, so you're the one being raped by your father, love." When I realised that everyone knew, I climbed up and was very angry. Soon after I arrived at Winlaton, staff began giving me regular contraceptive injections. During one of these visits, I disclosed that I had been raped by my father. A copy of gynecological history form that confirms that I had received the injections and that I had made the disclosure is annexed to this statement. Disclosure of sexual abuse at Winlaton. Over my time at Winlaton, there were a couple of different new youth workers assigned to me, but I can't remember all their names. The youth workers ran programs for us, including triad therapy, which was a form of group behaviour therapy. We got into a small group and talked about any issues we had. I remember that the triad therapy program was overseen by Eileen Slack. I was also regularly interviewed by my allocated youth workers at Winlaton. I don't remember how often these meetings occurred. I do, however, remember that we disclosed how I was going at Winlaton. I told my youth workers that my father had raped me. Some of the youth workers were really supportive. I remember 2 youth workers that were particularly good to me. One was named Kath Mitchison and one named Howard. I can't remember his surname. However, there were some youth workers who did not believe me when I told them I was being raped. After this, I refused to speak to those youth workers. My feelings towards my father and my relationship with him was extremely complicated. Although I was scared of my father and wanted the rapes to stop, I also wanted to see him and craved his affection because I didn't have anyone else. Growing up in a children's home, I had not learnt about appropriate boundaries. I knew a couple of other girls, both from home and from Winlaton, who had been raped by male family members. So, on the other hand, I thought that being forced to have sex with my father was normal. On the other hand, people were telling me that my father raping me was not okay and that I was the victim. On top of this, my father had threatened to hurt me or himself if I told anyone about him raping me. I was extremely confused. I was 15 at the time. I have been shown a number of documents recording the disclosure I made to social workers while at Winlaton. These documents are consistent with my recollection that the youth workers at Winlaton didn't think I was telling the truth about my father raping me and thought I was responsible or to blame. These documents also confirm that no action was taken as the result of my disclosures. While at Winlaton, I was required to fill out personal report sheets ahead of classification meetings. After completing these forms, I would give them to my youth worker. I thought these forms were a waste of time because no one paid attention to what I wrote. On the 18th of April, I wrote about my father in the personal report sheet. In this, I wrote.
In this personal report sheet, I wrote, My most serious problem is the relationship with my father, as my father has an emotional hold over me. He has forced me to have sex with him. I have been shown a request form for a psychiatric assessment for me, dated the 20th of April 1979, and signed by Noreen Moore and Jennifer Lyons. Someone has written at the top of the form, "For Michael Groom." I don't remember this assessment taking place, or telling Lyons or someone named Noreen Moore about the inappropriate relationship with my father. I do recall that around this time I began meeting with Michael Groom from the Children's Court Clinic at Winlaton. I remember my visits with Groom quite well. I met with him about once a week, and no one else was present during those meetings. I told Groom that my father raped me. My main recollection of Groom is that he was a very arrogant man. On the 8th of May 1979, I again wrote about my father in a personal report sheet. In this personal report sheet, I wrote and then struck out the following. My most serious problem is the sexual relationship with my father. I don't want to stop seeing him because of the emotional hold over me.
I also wrote, I think I should be the one who makes the decision to see my father or not see him. Nobody else. The reason I started telling people about my father and my sexual relationship is because I wanted help with him to handle the sexual relationship. I used to let my father have sex with me because I was too scared to say no. I said a couple of times, but then he wouldn't. No, a couple of times. Said he wouldn't talk to me. And in the end, I used to let him. When I asked for help, I didn't expect people to tell me to stop seeing my father. I had been shown an undated letter that I wrote to Groom around this time because I was confused and angry about not being allowed to visit my father. This letter is not in my handwriting, and so I must have had help to write it. I don't remember this, but think it could have been one of the youth workers. On the 22nd of May 1979, I again wrote about the relationship with my father in a personal report sheet. In this personal report sheet I wrote, I think the relationship with my father is the most serious problem. I can't understand why I can't see my father, but I can't understand what's wrong with ringing him up. On the 3rd of June 1979, I again wrote about the relationship with my father on a personal report sheet. In this personal report sheet, I wrote my most serious problem in the relationship with my father. I'm starting to work out my feelings for my father. I really think he can survive me. I hate him and love him at the same time. I think it's best if I don't see him outside for a while until I settle down. Visit from my father at Winlaton. The 14th of June 1979, my father visited me at Winlaton. I had been shown a number of documents that relate to or describe my father visiting Winlaton. The documents I had been shown state that Maryland Minister granted permission for my father to visit Winlaton on the 13th of June 1979 and just suggested that Groom also meet with my father. The documents also describe a visit from my father as a very essential visit and state that staff observed our relationship was not a normal father-daughter. I only remember my father visiting once. I remember that I was told about a meeting 10 minutes before I met with my father, not an hour before his due arrival time as it is recorded in the progress report. I met my father in the main dining hall at Winlaton. A youth worker was sitting nearby. but didn't intervene at any point during this meeting. My father moved up right... Can you read the words?
My father moved up right in my face, put his hand on my thigh and squeezed my leg hard. He said words to the effect of, "Keep your fucking mouth shut." I then got up and left. I was very scared. I felt like a robot that had stopped feeling, and I began self-harming again. To this day, I still consider the day that my father visited me as one of the greatest betrayals of my life. His visit made me feel like there was nowhere to escape from him.
Visiting home while at Winlaton. While I was at Winlaton, I was allowed to go home to visit my mother a couple of times. I mentioned visiting my mother one day and weekend leave in the personal review reports. Completed on the 22nd of May 1979 and the 3rd of June 1979. Although I don't recall my father living permanently with my mother at the time, I recall that he often visited while I was on temporary release from Winlaton. I was uncertain whether staff at Winlaton were aware that my father was present at my mother's house, but I suspected they must have known. I'd been shown a copy of Groom's handwritten notes dated the 20th of June 1979. I had a bad weekend because my father made sexual advances. This is consistent with my recollection that my father was present and attempted to rape me while I was on weekend leave. In reviewing my ward files, there does not appear to be any documentation that demonstrates the process that was followed before my temporary home release was approved to ensure that I was safe. Further disclosures at Winlaton. I had been shown a copy of Groom's notes from a meeting on the 26th of June 1979 with my mother and my maternal grandparents. The notes record that Groom spoke to my mother and grandparents about my father making sexual advances towards me. I have been shown a copy of Groom's notes from meetings with the following day, that is the 27th of June. These notes record when Groom told me that he had spoken to my family, I hit the roof, and said it just goes to prove people can't be trusted. This is an accurate description of how I felt at the time. I was not told that Groom was going to talk to my mother or grandparents. I did not consent to my mother or grandparents being told about the disclosures. I cannot understand why Groom advised my mother it was imperative to my emotional health that no legal action to be taken. My father should have been charged. I am disappointed that Groom didn't help me work through my fear of my father and for failing to properly advise my mother to help me. I was just a frightened child who didn't know what to do or how to handle the situation. And I was looking to professionals for help. I'm also disappointed that Groom, as a professional, didn't help or guide my mother to contact or support me. Instead, he further damaged our complicated relationship. On the 17th of July 1979, I completed a personal review report. In this report, I wrote, I haven't heard from Mum for a couple of weeks, but that really doesn't worry me. My most serious problem is that my mum knows about the relationship, but Dad doesn't know yet. I have been shown a letter that my mother wrote to my father on the 26th of July 1979. I had not seen this letter before preparing this statement. I'm extremely hurt that my mother was the first person to confront my father and that she didn't act upon my allegations. I am also confused about why no one from the department contacted the police. Transfer from Winlaton to Hillview. In June 1979, the staff at Winlaton and from the department decided it was appropriate for me to be transferred to Hillview House in Brunswick. I had been shown a couple of hostels referrals completed by Fitzgerald on the 25th of June 1979. I didn't give Fitzgerald permission to tell the staff at Hillview that my father had sexually abused me. I am angry about this now, but at this time I was used to everyone knowing my business and nobody doing anything about it. I've been shown a copy of a progress report completed by a groom on the 1st of August. I've also been shown a copy of a review action sheet dated the 7th of August 1979. These documents state that I wanted to be transferred to Hillview and that I had come to terms with my feelings about my father and had a more open relationship with my mother. At this stage, I was desperate to get out of Winlaton. On the 8th of August 1979, I was transferred from Winlaton to Hillview. Letter sent to father by department staff. On the 9th of August 1979, the day after I was transferred to Hillview, Lyons and Groom wrote a letter to my father telling him that I had told them that our relationship had been a sexual one for a long time, and when I first came to Winlaton, I asked for help in sorting out my feelings. I had been shown a copy of this letter. In 2009, I obtained a copy of my records from the Adoption and Family Records Service. This letter was not provided to me at this time by the department. When I found a couple of days later that the letter had been sent, I was appalled. Had been shown a file note completed by Bridget Burney, a social worker from the department, dated the 9th of August 1979. The file note accurately records that I was very anxious about my father's reaction to the letter and scared he would be angry or reject me. I have also been shown an undated transferred summary completed by Bernie around this time. Contrary to the transfer summary, I had not asked for this letter to be sent to my father. I did want help sorting out my feelings, but not from my father. I made it quite clear to Groom that I didn't want my father to know that everyone knew that he raped me by sending this letter. Groom abused my trust. By sending this letter, Groom and Lyons also put me in danger. It was sent just after I left the secure environment of Winlaton and went to Hillview House, where my father had greater access to me. This letter also ruined my relationship with my grandfather, who I had previously been quite close to, because he could not believe that my father was raping me. I was considered a liar. Reading the letter now, I am disgusted that it focuses on protecting my father and his feelings. The letter suggests that I was partially responsible for him raping me, rather than me being the victim. The fact that this letter was sent still makes me extremely angry. I still feel as though the department blamed me for everything that happened and has treated me like a perpetrator, not a victim. Hillview House. I was at Hillview for just over a year, from the 8th of August 1879 to December 1980. Hillview was run by the Salvation Army. Unlike at Winlaton, at Hillview, I was free to come and go as I pleased. My father could come and visit me whenever he wanted, and he did. I also visited my father regularly while I was at Hillview. I don't remember who initiated the visits, but I remember that my father began raping me again almost immediately.
An undated transfer summary completed by Bernie records staff at Hillville had contact with my father, and that I went on weekend leave with my father, and that it was suspected that my father had and may be continuing to rape me during weekend leave. I remember that I stayed overnight with my father while on leave from Hillview. I can't believe that this was permitted, even though the staff at Hillview knew that he had raped me. On one visit home, my father attacked me and said words to the effect of, "How dare you set me up like that and lie?" I ran off and called a woman from Hillview who came and picked me up. The staff and residents at Hillview knew that my father raped me.
The staff at Hillview continued to give me regular contraceptive injections. This is confirmed by a document entitled Hillview Review, completed by Bernie on the 4th of January 1980. Around this time, I began to drink heavily. I drank a whole bottle of whatever I could get my hands on. I was so drunk one day that I couldn't walk back to Hillview, so I crawled along the street on my hands and knees. The neighbourhood regarded me as a troubled teen, but no one bothered to ask why I was troubled. Discharge of wardship. Around December 1980, I moved from Hillview back to my parents' house because I had outgrown Hillview. My two brothers and both my parents were living together. I continued to have contact with Pearl, but she never visited the house. I also had contact with Margaret Knight. I don't remember if I had contact with any other department workers. After all my cries for help and the reports I'd made, so-called professionals within the department, I was put back into the situation I was trying to escape. My parents pressured me to have my wardship discharged because they were worried that it reflected badly on them. On the 1st of December 81, when I was 17 years old, my wardship was formally discharged. I was a little bit relieved because I thought it would make my parents happy. After I returned home, my father began to rape me every day. If I refused, he threatened me with violence and would follow through on these threats. He hit and punched me, but made sure to leave marks only where other people couldn't see. He killed me a couple of times. Around this time, I had a seizure and was taken to Prince Henry's. I was diagnosed with epilepsy. I remember telling the staff at the hospital that my father sexually abused me. No one did anything or took any action to protect me. I stayed at the hospital for a couple of nights and was sent back home with medication to control the seizures. Soon after this happened, I attempted to commit suicide because I'd had enough. I took 90 of the pills that I had been prescribed for epilepsy and was hospitalised for a couple of days. I remember the doctor saying that I was lucky to be alive. Further sexual abuse by my father after discharge. My father continued to rape me regularly for the next 24 years until 2005. In total, the sexual abuse spanned 27 years from when I was 13 to 41. In 1990, I found out that I was pregnant with my father's child. My son was born in 1990. No one at the hospital asked me who the baby's father was. My father started raping me again about a month after I returned from hospital. In 1992 and 1996, I suffered miscarriages while pregnant, with children fathered by my father. In 1998, I gave birth to another son by my father. I didn't tell anybody about the pregnancy and didn't receive any antenatal care because I wanted to kill myself and the child. In 2000, I gave birth to another son whose father is also his grandfather. Later in 2001, I gave birth to a daughter by my father. She was born 6 weeks premature and died 2.5 months after birth due to health complications.
She was born 6 weeks premature and died 2.5 months after birth due to health complications resulting from the child being fathered by her grandfather. After my daughter was born, I had a hysterectomy. My 2 younger sons still don't know that their grandfather is also their father. In around 2001 or 2002, I confided in my epilepsy counsellor, GWYN. GWYN helped me to arrange a place to live for my brother, my children and I, away from my parents' house. However, my father continued to visit me at this new home and the rapes continued until 2005.
Reporting the abuse. When I left care, I didn't report the abuse for many years because I didn't think that I would be believed due to not being believed all of my life. In 2002, with GWYN's encouragement, I reported the sexual abuse to the Centre Against Sexual Assault. I saw a counsellor, but it did not feel right to me, and so I decided to go elsewhere. The counsellor reported the matter to the police soccer unit, and within a very short time, a policewoman and a child protection worker from the department came to my house. I found the police judgmental and untrustworthy. The police told GWYN that they were considering charging me, and I was afraid that my children would be taken away from me. As a result, I denied the abuse and told the police and social workers to leave me alone. After about 3 months, the investigation ended. I felt as though I was back in the cycle of crying out for help but not being believed. I returned home and the abuse continued for a number of years. On the 30th of June 2005, I made a statement to the police for the purpose of applying for compensation for victims of crime Victoria. At the time, I was not ready to press charges and prosecute for applying for compensation for victims of crime Victoria. At the time, I was not ready to press charges and prosecute my father because I was afraid what my father and his friends would do to me or my brother. I received compensation to pay for counselling. During this process, I was supported by a woman from victims of crime named Jenny. Jenny was a great support, had also just begun seeing a psychologist at the time. Criminal prosecution. In 2007, I sought and was granted an intervention order against my father because I feared that he would be able to locate me and my children. In June 2008, I decided that I wanted to have my complaint fully investigated. I made a number of statements to police. My father was interviewed and denied that he had ever had any sexual interaction with me. The police took DNA samples from him, which proved that he was the father of my 3 sons. In February 2009, the police served the intervention order on my father, My father threatened to kill me and was arrested breaching the intervention order. He was jailed and has been in prison ever since. In April 2009, my father was charged with 83 separate counts, charges of incest, indecent assault on a girl under the age of 16 and common law assault. A committal hearing was scheduled for the 14th of July 2009. I understand that I would have had to give evidence and be cross-examined at this hearing. My father ultimately entered a plea of guilty to 13 rolled-up charges on the 15th of December 2009. On the 15th of February 2010, my father was sentenced, which the judge referred in her sentencing remarks. I prepared a victim impact statement, which the judge referred in her sentencing remarks. I watched the proceedings via video link. Overall, I found the court process frustrating because there was so many adjournments and delays. I didn't feel like I had a voice in the proceedings. I attended court via video link 3 or 4 times. I wasn't able to attend in person because I could have led to me and my children being identified by the media. I am upset that I didn't get to have my day in court because of the media attention around the proceedings. I was also very scared of my father and his friends and found it extremely intimidating just seeing him through the video link. I'm still upset that on the video link it looked like my video was very intrusive. A reporter came to my house a number of times during the trial court. During the criminal proceedings, the media was very intrusive. Although it didn't name me or my children, it contained enough information to identify us. This is how my oldest son found out that his grandfather is his name me or my children. It contained enough information to identify us. This is how my oldest son found out that his grandfather is his father. He continues to suffer severe anxiety as a result. I also suffered a nervous breakdown when the article was published. Can you hear it breathe?
Detective Danny Shaddock, who was in charge of the prosecution, was excellent and kept me informed throughout the whole process. He was someone I could call if there was anyone hassling me or if I had any questions about the case. He even spoke to the school my children attended to make sure that the school was aware of what was happening and to keep my children protected. The police assisted me to do this. I received files when I was the victim and he was the perpetrator. The letter also informed me that, quote, a second file from Winlaton, unquote, was destroyed in 2002. I was never given an explanation for why this file was destroyed. Some of the documents I received were redacted. For example, the letter my mother sent to my father after meeting with Michael Groom was redacted so that the name BGG was blacked out. 2010 or 2011. Similarly, documents that were missing from my ward files were in my brother's ward files and vice versa.
I recall that my solicitor had to chase up Adoption and Family Record Services for documents that were not provided to me. Even so, I did not receive a number of the documents that I had been shown by the Royal Commission in preparing this statement. For example, The letter sent to my father by Groom and Lyons. It was not in the files I received, nor was the file note signed Powell from 1976. The first term review completed by C. Hodge and dated the 6th of April 1979. The classification action sheet completed by Lyons and Fitzgerald dated the 18th of April 1979. The personal report sheet I completed on the 8th of May 1979. Civil proceedings against the department. In 2010, I commenced civil proceedings against the State of Victoria for failing to fulfil duty of care that they owe to me as a ward. I wanted acknowledgement from the department that they had done the wrong thing. I never received an apology or formal written acknowledgement from the department that they had screwed up. This would have been extremely helpful for me personally due to the many years of not being believed and supported. I was extremely angry at the department, said during settlement negotiations that they only knew about the sexual abuse while at Winlaton, even though the documents in my ward files show that the social or youth workers such as Fitzgerald and Pearl were involved with the family before I was placed in Winlaton. I found the civil proceedings very difficult and let my solicitor handle the proceedings. The civil proceedings settled in January 2011. I signed a deed of release with the State of Victoria, denied all liability because I was fed up with the whole process. I was exhausted and I had no more fight left in me. Once again, I don't feel like my voice was being heard or I was being believed. Impact of abuse. I have suffered from anxiety and depression for many years. I have also been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I have been on numerous different medications to treat these conditions but have trouble taking them as they make me feel very drowsy. Over the years, I've been admitted to psychiatric hospitals around 20 times as a result of nervous breakdowns. The last time I was admitted was in 2009 when media coverage of the criminal prosecutions nearly tipped me over the edge. I had tried to commit suicide a number of times. I'm extremely private and protective of myself, my brother and my children. There are very few people that I trust. I have sleep disorder and find it hard to sleep in a bed and generally I sleep on the couch. Finally, the sexual abuse also affected my education. As a child, I always wanted to be an interpreter because I was good at languages, but I never got to the opportunity to pursue this.
BGD, I just note for the record, you've got a support person there with you in the office where you are, is that right?
That's right.
And you've actually read most of that statement yourself, but from time to time
Yes.
she's been able to assist you with that?
Yes. Yeah.
Your Honour, could you just excuse me for one moment, BGD? I've got a couple of questions that I think BGD can assist us with, and I note the time. I wonder if it would be convenient to have a short break.
Take a short break.
Sorry,
BGD, we are going to take a short break. So we'll take the mid-morning break now and return in 20 minutes.